Good morning, everybody. I would like to start the conference by inviting the two presidents of the two co-hosting organizations, DNR and EEB, to open our EEB annual conference, Sailing the Winds of Change for Europe's Environment. Let us welcome Kai Niebert, President of DNR Deutscher Naturschutzring. Please, Kai.
Thank you, Patrizia, and thank you for joining us this very early Monday morning. Welcome to Germany, welcome to Berlin, dear friends. 30 years ago, we had a quite interesting time here in Berlin. 30 years ago, the wall was teared down, and so you come to Berlin, and actually it has been done in this month. So you come to Berlin in a month that is quite historic for the city. We have a special anniversary that honors the events during the fall in 1989 and remembers us on the power of the people and how the power of the people can change politics. I'm happy to welcome you to this year's EEB conference, and I'm happy that we have very high-profile guests today here. I can welcome Carsten Sach as the Director General for the climate politics in not only in the ministry, I can say for Germany here today. Welcome, Carsten. And I'm happy that our minister, Svenja Schulze, will join us somewhere during the day, and she will close the day today. The fall of the wall was not only the beginning of the German unification process, but also of a bigger European integration process. A very interesting thing we can see in Germany is how we can deal with former borders. You might know that the border has gone through all of Germany, or what we call all of Germany today. Today, the former death strip, how we called it, is one of the most, I could say, unusual nature reserves we have in Europe. We have built the green belt along this former wall, along this former border through Germany. The project began already in 1989, 30 years ago, and it's facing today 1,400 kilometers of a nature reserve going through all of Germany. A network of fences and guard towers separating east from the west has now become a sign of a working nature in Germany. The current political events and negotiations are demonstrating that times have dramatically changed during the years. We have tried to tear down walls then, and now we try to avoid new walls. When I look to Ireland, for example, and what is happening there with the Brexit. The elected president of the upcoming European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, announced an agenda that is giving, yes, I can say it's really giving hope. We have become quite curious when she started to talk about the Green New Deal and how Europe has to react to climate politics and raise its NDCs. The German EU presidency has become a crucial moment from our perspective for the multi-annual financial framework. The current proposal for the MFF has been strongly framed by the former Commission, but the finalization should be done with the Green New Deal in mind and the new European environmental program in mind. We can see that European citizens are on the rise for environmental actions. We have a strong youth movement, not only in Germany, but all over Europe. We will see the next highlight of this movement by the end of this month, at the 29th of this month. There is again an international climate strike announced by this youth movement. And we see how these young people are really pushing politics forward. In this next German EU presidency that will be influenced by this youth movement, we do not only have to focus on climate, but on other issues as well. We have the next CBD taking place in China next year, and this will be a very important point, because there we have to we have to invent something, and we have to really frame this whole conference that we have the Paris moment that we had for climate change. We have to have this Paris moment also for biodiversity. We need to have a Green New Deal, but we also need an 8th environmental program for the EU, because this is environmentally binding, at least for the Commission and for the Council and the Parliament. We have to see how this trickles down to the national states. Therefore, the EU needs some really serious transitions to sustainable development within the planetary boundaries. The thing is, we have no time. We have an initiative in Germany. If I look to biodiversity, counting what dies, and we have to end the biodiversity loss, as well as we have to stop climate change. This is something when I look at the planetary boundaries and see how we are dealing with climate change and talking about climate change in the public, and I see when I look at the planetary boundaries how urgent the pressure is on agriculture and how we need to reframe the whole European agriculture politics, then I see that we have a lot of priorities in the next years. When I look to the challenges Europe has and the challenges we have as European environmental organizations, I think back to my studies of biology. Now I'm president of the German League for Nature, but I started to work as a biologist, and I don't know what we will have out for lunch today. Our policy at the DNR is that we have vegetarian lunch, but perhaps sometimes we already also have fish there. And so let me end with a small metaphor for this whole conference. You might know this very famous fish, the salmon, that is always lying on the buffet somewhere. You know, this pink fish, and this is a very special fish because it lives somewhere in the sea, and when it becomes mature, it starts to go up small rivers into the mountains, lays its eggs there, and dies. From biological or more from an ecological perspective, it's good that it dies, because when the young larvae come from the eggs, they have a problem, because it's just clear water up there, nothing to eat, and so it's good that at least their former parents are there to eat. But the question is, why does the salmon die somewhere up in the mountains? And as a biologist, we always thought that the reason is apoptosis. So it's a programmed cell death. So it has fulfilled its life cycle and it can die there. And but a former colleague of mine from Göttingen, he won a big project and he has done something I always wanted to do. He was able to rent a helicopter with the project money, with the project fund he had. And so he went up the hill into the mountains and collected the salmons, made small red signs on the salmons and put them back into the sea. And then he went back to the mountains next year. And guess he was finding? He was finding a lot of salmons with these red dots on them. So it cannot be the cell death. It cannot be the programmed cell death. It cannot be the idea of fulfilling the whole cycle. So the question is, why does the salmon die? The salmon dies because when he's in the sea and he wants to become he wants to mate, then he experiences something you might also know when you start to, when you want to mate, your focus angles down and you just start to look like that. So he goes up the mountains like this, and he doesn't look left and right. He just goes up the mountain, and he's in something like a trance. And so he goes up the mountains, puts down his axe there, or her axe in the end, and he wakes up again. Looks left, looks right, and sees a lot of salmon, nothing to eat, a lot of stress, heart attack, death of salmon. And what I want you to invite, and there I stop with the metaphor, what I want you to invite to is that we use this conference, use our organizations, that in this very critical situation Europe is in the moment, we have to wake up Europe. We have to wake up Europe and start to look left and right, look at biodiversity and climate to make Europe become a bright future and not face it, the death of the salmon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai. So let me invite Jouni Nissinen, President of the European Environmental Bureau, for your welcoming speech.
Thank you, Patrizia, and thank you, Kai, for your welcoming words and setting the scene for the conference. Indeed, on behalf of the European Environmental Bureau, I have the honor to welcome you to sail with us the winds of change for Europe's environment, as the bold title of the EEB annual conference proclaims. It's wonderful to come back to the EEB family again, one last time as the president of the EEB, to take stock of the threats and opportunities facing our environment, and to chart the way forward to a greener future. As the largest and most inclusive European network of environmental citizens groups, as our mission states, the EEB should definitely try to be at the helm of this development. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you for having given me the opportunity to act as the EEB president. And it's really wonderful to see you all in Berlin, which is definitely one of my favorite cities in Europe. Ich bin ein Berliner, indeed, and this time the city has even just celebrated the anniversary of the reunification of the two sides. But I'm afraid that if you collected all the existing pieces of the Berlin Wall together now, you would have a wall long enough to stretch from Berlin all the way to Brussels. I too claim to be a proud owner of a piece of the Berlin Wall, but I did not buy it from the streets back then when they were sold as souvenirs. I have collected the piece of the Berlin Wall from here some 20 years ago. Or was it 30 years ago? 30 years ago, it must, yeah, of course. Sorry. 30 years ago, myself. I was just finishing high school and I was on a trip to Berlin. Aber wir reden mehr von der Mauer ein bisschen später. Zuerst möchte ich einen Moment dazu benutzen, den generösen Finanzier dieser Konferenz zu danken. Also, einen ganz herzlichen Dank zum Umweltbundesamt, the German Environment Agency, Bundesministerium für Umwelt, Naturschutz und nukleare Sicherheit, the German Federal Ministry of the Environment, und LIFE-Programm der Europäischen Union. Eine deutsche Freundin von mir hat einmal gesagt, dass es typisch für uns Nordländer ist, immer warme Grüße zu schicken. Anscheinend, weil es bei uns immer so kalt ist. So, einen ganz warmen Dank für Ihre finanzielle Unterstützung. Und natürlich danke ich auch Biela Vossen und der gesamten Besatzung des Deutschen Naturschutzrings, die das alles in praktisch ermöglicht haben. Also, I want to thank the whole EEB staff for putting together this interesting program and other annual events. I'm quite happy to be in Berlin preparing for the German EU presidency, while Finland is still trying to make the best out of its presidency. It will be interesting to hear what has been achieved to date and what we can still expect from the Finns before the end of the year. Unfortunately, we have heard that the CAP might actually become environmentally weaker, which would be really bad news in this era of climate awakening. On the other hand, at least Finland has become a more active supporter of measures against forest loss, when the feared consequences of Jair Bolsonaro's anti-environmentalism have become headline news all over the world. Anyway, it's good to distance oneself a bit from Helsinki to see clearer from a bit further far away. Even if it's not always clear who sees clearly and who does not. Take the fall of the Berlin Wall as an example. Of course, all the Germans must know it, but I learned only recently that the fall of the wall might actually have been the result of a mistake, the way it happened. That this guy, the spokesman of the Politburo of East German Communist Party, Günther Schabowski, read his unclear handwritten notes without knowing what had been discussed in the meeting where he was not present, and then haltingly responded to a question about when new traveling rules will take effect. As far as I know, as of now. That was 7 p.m. on November 9th, 1989. The train of European history took off and had neither brakes nor reverse. But 30 years later, the debate is still on. Was the sudden demise of the Berlin Wall just an accident of history, a slip of the tongue? Or was it a planned move by the East German dictatorship, which realized it was in a dead end? Also, now we live in important times, and a change is coming, one way or another. The new Commission, new Parliament, and new EU presidency teams have a major responsibility to seize the opportunities that climate and environmental action present and take the necessary action to prevent a looming catastrophe. This time not caused by liberated people, but by a neoliberal economy that externalizes the impacts on climate and other living beings and puts economic growth first, regardless of the costs. Who of our leaders would be the Günther Schabowski of our time, saying, possibly by accident, that preventing climate breakdown and ending biodiversity loss are simply more important than economic growth? Effective as of now. Full stop. No caveats, no howevers, no competition firsts. As we know, the political field is in turmoil. It seems that in many countries, the two political movements that increase their support are populist movements and the Greens. What these two often contradictory political worldviews have in common is that at least they say something clearly. They have principles that they speak out, and their messages are distinctive from others. They are recognizable and not afraid of telling what they think. This is the same that the new youth climate movement expects from us all, that we speak out clearly and act together. But are we up to this challenge? Is the environmental movement, after all, a generational movement for the people born in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, like somebody has suggested? Or can it turn a new page? And if it cannot, are these autonomous youth movements the new environmental movement? Some of us believe that the purpose of the environmental movement is to make itself needless. But then, who takes care of the long-term advocacy for the less appealing environmental issues, like pesticides, hazardous wastes, etc.? Or is it so that they can already be taken care of by competent authorities, possibly helped occasionally with fashionable short-term campaigns of PR firms interested in pro bono work with the youth? I don't know. But if it is so, then I hope that I'm still flexible enough to see the change coming and renew my own thinking. Today, we are here to discuss the environmental politics of the EU, but the EEB members are here in Berlin also to discuss, at our meeting tomorrow, the long-term strategy that shapes the future of this movement. I'm quite excited about the thoroughness and the way it has been prepared. As people who believe in a future where people and nature thrive together, we need to make sure that the way we work remains fresh, and we remain fresh and renew our thinking in the decade to come, because big changes are coming to politics, to the environment, and to the whole of society. This conference takes place at a moment of great opportunity. The contrast between Juncker's business-first, environment-last priorities, which we discussed in an atmosphere combining despair, anger, and defiance at our conference almost exactly 5 years ago, and von der Leyen's commitment to a European Green Deal as the first of her 6 priorities, could hardly be more stark. Of course, it remains to be seen what the actual content of the deal will be, but the headline commitments contained in the political guidelines are already encouraging, like making Europe the first climate-neutral continent or introducing a strategy for green financing and a sustainable Europe investment plan. An ambitious European Green Deal is not only crucial for the nature, for the well-being of society and for a healthy, sustainable economy. It's also good for the EU itself, showing that it is able and willing to address issues that the large majority of citizens care deeply about. Dear participants, today I hope that we can break the walls between us participants and learn from each other. I hope that we have good conversations. I hope that we can have wind in our sails and reach new open seas of environmental understanding. And I hope we have a good time. You are warmly welcome. Sie sind herzlich willkommen.
So thank you very much to our two presidents for opening the conference. Today, the two of us will have the pleasure to guide you through the program and to moderate our debates. My name is Patrizia Heidegger. I'm the Director for Global Policies and Sustainability with the EB's team in Brussels.
And I'm Patrizia Brink. I'm the EU Policy Director as well, EB.
Do you want to say more about the red thread in the program of today?
So thanks. I mean, you'll see it's all about the theory of the sailing the tides of change. And what I wanted to introduce you to the overall red thread of the day. Because we do have a new parliament. We have almost got a new commission, which has promised the European Green Deal. And that's been endorsed within the context of the political guidelines, which were the basis and the foundation of the new commission, and when she was elected or voted in under the parliament. You also have, I mean, this is the big game of change. We'll see what the commission comes up with. But in addition, you have every 6 months a new presidency. So you have different roles of different people. And in this conference, we're trying to look at the roles of each. We also heard that under an ambitious approach, you need a whole of government approach. We also need a whole of society approach. And so we will also listen and have a session on basically the stakeholders. And each of these sessions will look at different questions. But overarchingly, we want to hear from today is, what do you see as success in the next 2 years, i.e. under the trio presidencies, and the next 5 years, i.e. the Commission and the Parliament? What should the EU do? So what should be in the Green Deal? And just a quick tangent, on the web page, you do have a vision as to what we think should be in the Green Deal, and also a vision as to what's happening under the presidency, so have a look at that. In addition, it's not just one organization doing it. We want to understand what the different collaborations are, who can work with who, what innovative collaborations can make it work, and for ourselves, what can civil society do? So where is our agency? Where can we help in this process? And to build on like what Jouni says, how is the movement and the mission? So in terms of the structure, we're first going to talk about how EU protects, then we're going to have the stakeholder panel, and then we have something quite innovative, and I'll warn you about it now and I'll warn you later. We have 15 thematic tables where all of you will be looking at those questions, and you get to choose the tables. And then we'll have a deep dive into what the presidencies can do, from the past presidency to the current presidencies to the future presidencies, so we can see how different countries work together to create the Europe we want. And then we will wrap it up at the end of the day with this, well, first of all, Patrizia will pull back all the threads, and then we have someone from Croatia to basically create, Tony Vidan, to create a link to the Croatian presidency, which will pick up from the Finns, which is ongoing. So that's effectively the red thread. So at the end, we'll hopefully have an excellent vision as to what the challenges are, what we want as success, and how we can all work together.
Perfect. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. So we want to invite you to raise questions, to comment, to share your input. By speaking, but also by using different online tools. So you've probably already seen that we have a Slido. If you're not familiar with it, take your smartphone or your laptop and go to sli.do. Use the password and participate to the polls and the questions, and we will integrate what you say there into the discussion as well. But we also invite you to really speak up and ask your questions when you want to. So we will then move to the first session. And I'm inviting our keynote speaker to come to the front. Carsten Sach. from the podium. So just to introduce our speaker, unfortunately the State Secretary Jochen Flassbart couldn't be with us this morning due to last-minute obligations, but we're very glad to have Carsten Sach with us, the Director General in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation and Nuclear Safety. Since 1999, Mr. Sach has also been the lead negotiator for Germany in the UNFCCC COPs, and he's also in leading roles in the European Environmental Agency and the International Renewable Energy Agency. Please, Mr. Sach.
Thank you, Patrizia. Thank you, Jouni. Thank you, Kai. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. And as was just pointed out by Kai and Jouni, we're in the middle of exciting month. And no more metaphors or remembrance of 30 years ago, but I have to confess that I was on the wall that very night, and it was just probably changing my life as well. You choose as the title of this session, Europe Protects, with a question mark. A Europe that protects has gained some prominence as a slogan used to describe what Europe is about. It was the motto of the Austrian presidency and has been used by the Commission to describe the security union. Ursula von der Leyen also refers to this motto in her agenda under the heading of protecting our European way of life. The slogan just a few months or years ago has been criticized as focusing too much to security, borders, migration, terrorism. But I agree that protecting the environment is also about a Europe that protects. The Finnish presidency will host an event on December 3 and 4 in Helsinki, Europe that protects, safeguarding our planet, safeguarding our health. And this conference will deal with climate change, air pollution, chemicals, food production, forests and cities, basically your agenda of today. And I think it's both an important task and an important opportunity to protect the natural environment, the natural capital of Europe, its people from climate change and environment degradation. The 7th Environmental Action Programme was cited, living well within the limits of the planet, respecting and safeguarding the natural world is not only something we strive for, but a prerequisite for human well-being, for human health and quality of life, for economic well-being as well, and for social justice. The expectation, as was pointed out, of the European citizens are very high, in particular from the young people in the streets. And they are showing us that they want more ambitious and decisive action to protecting the climate and the environment. I'm glad as you that the President-elect Ursula von der Leyen is putting forward a European Green Deal within the first 100 days of her mandate. From what I have heard so far about the Green Deal, I'm hopeful and confident that we will make real progress over the next 5 years. Of course, the success of the Green Deal will depend on the ambition of the proposals, the decisiveness of the new president, and the level of priority given to the Green Deal within the new Commission. And that's not a done deal yet. I think the new structure of the Commission is promising, giving the Green Deal and the climate portfolio to the first Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans, is an important signal. He will need to coordinate and bring together diverging views, including those of agriculture, transport, and the building sectors, and find solutions for a real transformative Green Deal. I also very much welcome the announcement of the President-elect for ambitious climate action. I especially like the initiative for a European climate law as an overarching framework for Europe's climate and overall policy. I agree that should make the 2050 climate neutrality target binding and contain some overarching principles and purposes of the EU climate policy to give some landing ground for an ambitious climate policy to come. The proposal for a just transition initiative will be important to get all members to agree on more ambition, and we are talking about raising ambition, and we have a heavy debate on that in Germany here, and my minister and this ministry is, of course, supporting the president-elect on that route. Another very positive initiative will be the new Circular Economy Action Plan and the Single-Use Plastic Strategy, building on the achievements of the current Commission's Action Plan. I'm also very pleased, and Kai in particular mentioned that the new Commission wants to push for an ambitious new biodiversity strategy. The EU needs to make its high ambition internally and externally, because we need to develop clear expectations for CBD's COP15 in Kunming, China next year under the German presidency. We can only push for an ambitious new global biodiversity framework if we are showing commitment back home, and the agricultural policy has already been mentioned. However, as much as I welcome the ambitious agenda for the Green Deal, there are also some priorities missing. In my view, we still need a common understanding amongst all institutions and stakeholders for the long-term strategic planning of environment policy. To determine what we want to achieve until 2030, the Commission, Parliament and the Council should agree on a new environmental action programme. At least to say that's an obligation in the treaty. The current action programme runs out in 2020. To avoid a gap, the Commission should propose a new environmental action programme at the very beginning of its mandate. Germany is determined to conclude negotiations under its presidency. The farm to fork strategy that will be part of the Green Deal can be an important step towards a truly sustainable farm and food system. However, the first priority should be a common agricultural policy with a high level of climate and environmental ambition, which will be decided soon and will pave the way for the next 7 years. Or in other words, if we don't get this right, it will be an uphill battle to get improvements later on. We also expect the new Commission to put a proposal for a non-toxic environmental strategy on the table. The commitment left over from the 7th Environment Action Programme should not be forgotten or put on hold ahead of the announced zero pollution strategy. Also, the new Commission should improve access to justice in line with the Aarhus Convention. I expect the Commission to review the Aarhus regulation soon after taking office. Of course, the success of the Green Deal also depends on the ambition and willingness to work together in the Council and in the Parliament. I'm also counting on your support, the support of civil society, of all of you, to help steer the proposals of the Green Deal through troubled waters of Brussels decision-making. It's important to keep up the pressure, in particular on the European Common Agricultural Policy and the new Environmental Action Programme. Yes, and thank you for the thanks, Jouni, on that one. We, the German Ministry and the EB, are already cooperating very well. And when the wind changes again, to use your image, we are prepared to keep the ship afloat together. I also have high hopes for the dialogue among EU lawmakers, stakeholders and civil society during the next 5 years. Ursula von der Leyen has proposed setting up a conference on the future of Europe to launch a broad exchange within Europe. I highly welcome this initiative to bring people and different views together. Without that, we don't get deep transformation. And also regarding climate action specifically, the Commission wants to launch a European Climate Pact to develop pledges from institutions and stakeholders on what behavior change will be necessary and agreeable to reach our climate goals. I'm curious to hear concrete ideas for the Climate Pact from this conference and later on. I'm very much looking forward to the next month and years, in particular to our presidency of the Council in the second half of 2020. We will have important issues on our agenda: climate, the COP in Glasgow, the climate law, raising European ambition, the biodiversity COP in Kunming. We will also host an international conference on chemicals management, ICCM5 in Bonn, and we will probably have many of the Green Deal proposals on our agenda. And we will put new topics on the agenda, especially focusing on digitalization and sustainability. You find that in our coalition treaty, you find that in all European documents, all over digitalization, but the link to sustainability and to environmental protection is still missing. You will be hearing more from my minister and from myself later this afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me once again, and I'm just looking forward to discussing now with you a little bit, but I think we'll be hearing from Pascal now. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, Carsten Sach. So indeed, we have a video message from Pascal Canfin, the new chair of the European Parliament's Environment Committee. He cannot be with us today, but he sent us a video message, and then we'll indeed go into some more follow-up questions with Carsten Sach.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you and to have a chance to share some ideas with you on the Green Deal, the climate emergency, and all the topics you fight for and I fight for on a daily basis. So to my view, the Green Deal is the top priority for the next 5 years. And the Green Deal, it's of course about climate, but not only about climate. When I meet Frans Timmermans, van der Leyen, and the other political leaders, I recall again and again that the environmental crisis is fourfold. The first dimension, of course, maybe the most well-known, is climate. But there is also the biodiversity crisis, the resource crisis, which is linked to plastic and circular economy, and of course, the health dimension related to pesticides, for instance. So when you look at climate, biodiversity, resource, and health issues, then you have the full scope of the challenges we have to address in the umbrella or the framework of the Green Deal. In order to be a success, to my view, the Green Deal needs to address four big challenges. The first one is, of course, the financing. I mean, you can have targets. If you don't have the finance to follow, then it will be a paper target. So it is through the MFF, through the money to the CAP, but also the transformation of the EIB into the climate bank, and so we need to have a clear financing plan and roadmap in order to have the Green Deal financed. The second dimension for success is fair transition. We need, of course, to have social justice, both in terms of territories, regions, and in terms of social categories. So we have, for instance, the proposal of a just transition fund, but we have to go beyond that to make sure that the whole budget, the whole structural funds are aligned with the Paris Agreement, but also socially fair when it comes to the transformation. The third dimension is deployment. In the industrial sector and in the agricultural sector. If we do not manage to get that right, then we will have, again, targets on paper, but we will fail to deliver. So that's why that will imply a reform of the ETS, that will imply something, a redesign of some parts of the CAP, and it will imply also to have some sort of master plan to know what we are after. Actually, what it is to be a car maker in Europe that is going to be carbon neutral. What is it to be a European car maker in a carbon neutral economy? What is it to be a steel maker in a European neutral carbon economy? So we need to address that with clear targets, timelines, to avoid, I would say, wishful thinking on both sides, and to make sure that we are serious both with the industrial base, carbon neutral industrial base, and serious with the carbon neutrality. And the fourth challenge is the governance issue. And that's where we have, for instance, the climate law. That's where we have the need to have legally binding targets for biodiversity. That's where we need to have a new circular economy package, but also to maybe highlight the fact that with the Green Deal, for the first time, we have a commission which is newly organized. And imagine that the commission would be a government, a national government. Then you would have the equivalent of Frans Timmermans, let's say a vice prime minister, having in charge 2/3 of the budget, agriculture, climate, environment, energy, transport, health. That's the portfolio, the remit of the portfolio of the team under Timmermans. So I would say that that's a big change. That might be a game changer. But of course, and that will be a very concrete demonstration or not in the coming weeks with the communication on the Green Deal, the reform of the CAP and so on. Is the Commission serious with this Green Deal new setting? And we will see that very soon. I would say that very short term, one of the main threats is the inconsistency with the CAP. I mean, we can't have a CAP that will last almost up to 2030 that wouldn't be aligned with biodiversity objectives and climate objectives. So that's one of the key topics for the coming weeks, so that we see if there is a change at the European level, both in the Parliament and the Council, but also a new energy coming from the Commission to make sure that the agricultural policy is really under the umbrella of the Green Deal and not on paper. So in order to get there on health, biodiversity, climate and resource, I think we need a clear method. The method is, of course, to set the proper targets. That's the fight again on carbon neutrality, the fight for the target of 2030 and so on. But it's not only about targets, because we had a target on biodiversity and we failed to deliver. So it's not only about targets, it's about the means of implementation. So back to what I said, the 4 dimensions: governance, financing, social justice, and deployment, concrete deployment. That's where I expect also the NGOs to be on the ground. So not only fighting for targets, for new and additional and ambitious targets, for sure we need to do so, but also being very concrete on how we are going to deliver on just transition, on deployment in the industrial sector and so on. So that's why I will, of course, work a lot with the stakeholders, NGOs, businesses, think tanks, because that's the way I do politics, trying to be inclusive, and then at the end of the day also taking my responsibility as chair of the ENVI committee, and that will be my final word. I welcome very much the fact that today in the Parliament the ENVI committee is the largest committee of this Parliament. So it means something. It means that something has changed within this House, and I hope that we'll be able to change for real in terms of technologies, in terms of rules, in terms of targets, on all the scopes I mentioned in the coming months. It's my responsibility, it's my duty, and that's what I'm fighting for. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pascal Canfin. And we have a bit more time to have some follow-up questions with Carsten Zach. So we gave this session the title Europe Protects ? And the reason for that is that, as we all know, since the EU first started legislating on environmental policies back in 1972, European environmental policies have always been very high up in the rank of what European citizens actually like about the EU. At the same time, already back in 2017, so before the climate strikes, before Extinction Rebellion, before the movements that we're seeing now, 94% of all European citizens were highly concerned with the state of the environment. They listed climate change, air pollution, and the growing amount of waste on top of the list. At the same time, European citizens also said back in 2017 in a Eurobarometer that 80% said that they believe that the big companies and the industries are not doing enough to protect climate and the environment. And also nearly 2/3 said 2 years ago that they believe that the EU is not doing enough to protect the environment. So this is why we put this question at the beginning of this conference, and to explore the opportunities that we all see in the next five years linked to the promise of this European Green Deal. Now, I have one issue I would like you to comment on a little bit more. You've already mentioned the commitment to an 8th environmental action program. I would like you to comment a bit more also about the link of the Green Deal and our commitments under the 2030 agenda. Pascal Canfin also has mentioned the question of consistency between different policies. Now, what we see when we look at what has been promised under the Green Deal and other parts of the political priorities, the other chapters, the other priorities, there are some inconsistencies. I mean, just to mention two, one has been mentioned already, which is, well, there's a promise of a sustainable food policy, but with the ongoing negotiations around the common agriculture policy, we do not really see that this is going in a direction where farmers are actually, where we promote a climate-neutral agriculture, where we promote sustainable farming. And another example might be an inconsistency between the Green Deal and the clear promise or priority to further boost international trade volumes rather than focusing on better but not necessarily more trade. So what do you think? How can we make sure that the European Green Deal can also deliver on policy coherence for sustainable development? And how can we overcome these inconsistencies?
Thank you again for inviting me. And I think Pascal did make at least two very important messages. It is not just about new targets, but just to concentrate on implementation within the line policies. And the second one, it's about policy coherence, and you picked both of them up. Basically, I see a time challenge. The CAP negotiations are running ahead of the political discussions we will be having. So we need to assume already of what should be the main features of the European Green Deal while having quite classical agricultural negotiations. And Pascal proudly said Timmermans is responsible for 2/3 of the EU budget. Yes, but current negotiations really show that at least half of it would be directed in the wrong direction. So it is very crucial that we get there. How to do that? There are some smaller aspects of getting more money for the second pillar. Having said that, you know that many countries, including my own, are pushing for fiscal not to have a budget out of range, put it like this, just in that it is of a fiscal discipline, and so far agriculture ministries leading on the negotiations are pushing for keeping just the first pillar at the same size. And that's not just a development into the right direction, it is a development in the wrong direction. So we need to be hard there, and I wish you campaign and just go into the weeds of these points. We have quite some intense discussions internally with our agriculture ministry, and that's probably in all the countries. So we need to be agile, but also to show the new opportunities for farmers, for rural development with another agricultural policy. It is of utmost importance.
Thank you. So, let me see if there are questions from the floor. Oh, yes, so there's one poll going on Slido, but we will look at the results at the end of the session. So I would first like to see if there's questions to Carsten Sach. So as you probably saw on the agenda, he will be in another panel this afternoon talking more specifically on the role of the German presidency. So maybe if you can keep your questions on the presidency for the afternoon, and any other questions to Germany's position or wider issues. So I'll take 3 questions. Do say who you are and be precise. So we'll start with Raphael, and then we'll come here.
Thank you very much. My name is Raphael Weiland, working for the German NGO NABU. I want to follow up on the inconsistencies Patrizia started with, but in a slightly different manner. When we look at the European Union, in the last years, Germany developed much more and more into a from the front runner into the blocking force. I mean, if you look at the one-in, one-out principle, Germany was one of the member states that were pushing for that. When we look at the investment bank and the gas discussion and so on and so on, Aarhus amendment of the Aarhus Convention, how do you think, or how do you think we could get to the wind of change if Germany, the biggest member state, does not change that and get more ambitious?
Thank you. Let's take 2 more. There was one question here in the front. Yes, please. Yes. Yes.
Can I just speak? Thank you very much. Mike Clark, and until recently I was a member of the REFIT platform, responsible for the agricultural policy area. And with EEB, we put forward a proposal for a fitness check of the CAP, which was intended to stimulate a lot of debate on top of everything else, which it did. What I think it highlighted, though, is that, frankly, there's been a 3-card trick in Europe over several decades in terms of the agriculture CAP being set as a policy and a budgetary direction out of line and not aligned with the other big policy programs of Europe. And I just wanted to support and endorse your comments. And in particular, though, it seems to be in the next 18 months or so, if we're going to behave differently, if actually we need to believe this is a crisis, I really think the classical approach that you said has to be challenged and tested. And is there the political will at heads of state level to do that?
Thank you. Do we have one more? Yes, please, in the middle.
Hello, Yuri Lowy, Society for Sustainable Living. Well, I do think that the European Union can be sustainable with the idea of continuing economic growth.
Okay, I start. Germany being now a laggard, not a front runner. My perception is that we have a diverse mix of positions on that one. We were driving many of the agendas forward, but you are absolutely right that we had different priorities in government policies, and you could clearly see them. So if you looked at transport policy or agricultural policy, they were not in line. With regard to Aarhus, I would probably see the biggest issue, and you're very well aware that so far it is the European Commission itself who is least open just in that respect, and I was hinting to that earlier on. But I take a challenge that we need to get much more consistent, and that goes also to the second questions. On the new program, I think parties within this country and in Europe agreed that we need to have a change. And that's what you see in the Ursula von der Leyen agenda. But at the same time, we are seeing that countries are going on just with the same kind of policies. So probably the lines to take in Germany, which we are still fighting on agricultural policies, are still the same than before Ursula von der Leyen made its announcement. And it goes without saying that, as I said earlier on, that we want to have more money just for the second pillar. We want to have just at least 30% earmarked for environmental purposes, etc., etc. So you know our positions, but so far they're not the position of this government, and that's why we need support. But I think what I have seen, and just in the last weeks, where my main priority was just on our German climate policy package, there were moments where watering down proposals in the last minute was not acceptable. So we needed to follow, and for example, I'm pretty proud on my climate change law. We were not we could hold the line more or less, while on just the entry price for CO2 pricing, there was a typical political compromise, and we needed to start too low. So you could see it in the same weeks, but I think we need to get a pattern that we hold politicians accountable for what they promise at the grand lines, and just be consistent and putting it down with, at the granular level. On your question whether a sustainable Europe is possible without changing the growth pattern. So yes, we have to change the growth pattern. Whether it is very successful in just going against the growth pattern just very directly, I have my doubts, particularly as that is something which is not seen promising outside Europe and with the social poor. But if you ask me whether BIP is the best indicator for social well-being, of course not. And I think we need to find, and we tried to do that 10 years ago, to develop indicators which are informing policy better than just looking at economic growth. So I think we need to have a societal debate on that, because otherwise with just pure economic growth, we will not be able to developing Europe into the political entity we want to develop it.
Thank you. Are there more immediate questions? Yes, there's one here.
Thank you. Estonian Society for Nature Conservation, Johan. I'm a little bit embarrassed that neither you, neither Musyogan fan didn't mention international or global dimension. What's the impact of change of position of the United States towards Paris agreements? If China goes one way or India another way, do you have some plan B or C, or that aspect, that global aspect could be quite vital even? Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Comments? Yes?
Hi, Mark Preston from Bologna, Europa. Pascal Canfin mentioned industrial decarbonization, and I would like to know if you could provide any updates on Germany's plans for carbon capture and storage. I saw recently that Germany and the Netherlands agreed to collaborate on this, and if you have any concrete plans, for example, an industrial CCS in North Rhine-Westphalia. Thank you very much.
Do we have somebody else? Yes, please.
Thank you. Hello, it's Mark Griffiths from WWF. My sense is that incrementalism is our biggest enemy. And what I mean by that is the changes that we need are not 1 or 2% improvements on a yearly basis. we need 7% a year for 10 years, which then halves climate emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So my question, or more my comment, is do we have the leadership that is able to make such bold claims and actually deliver on them in a very short space of time? Thank you.
Thank you. On the international agenda, I think the international agenda needs to be part of our leaders' agenda. And I will be talking about that this afternoon, because with the US in the process of dropping out of Paris and other multilateral rules, we need to build new alliances. And China is a difficult partner, but one worthwhile investing in it. And we will be having a EU-China Council in full format, so all heads of state and government are from the EU side, plus President Xi Jinping from China. And environment and climate change and biodiversity need to be a top priority, because if we, the environment ministries, are just going for it, it is not enough. Yes, you're right that it's that many of the wins at the international level are not that favorable, but I would just turn it around. That's why it is important that we believe in protecting our people and creating a new carbon neutral continent by 2050 at the latest is that important that we show a role model. So far, it's rather the small countries who are aligning with us, but we need some big partners, and developing a China and India strategy with climate change and biodiversity at the forefront is key. On industrial decarbonization, you might have read that just it's now 10 days ago on Friday, we inaugurated, or my minister inaugurated, a new center of excellence for industrial decarbonization. And we see hopes that more and more German companies commit to be carbon neutral by 2050, including, for example, the steelmaker Thyssen. And if Parliament agrees, and the budget committee meetings were on Thursday, we get a new $1 billion pot of money to helping the heavy industries to decarbonize where we don't have solutions yet. We spoke to the incoming research commissioner, his DG, in lining up. So it is more that we decarbonize that processes. You talked about CCS and the generic line of cooperation with the Netherlands on that one. Yes, probably we see a window of necessity, I would call it, for CCS as well, but more for the industry sector, not for the energy sector. So it is for us the last resort, and where we probably need a little bit, because we don't have that many resources, and that's an issue dividing our societies, but we won't rule it out. And in particular, we see what's happening in Norway, in the Netherlands, and the UK. So we are following this up. There are some very good developments, but also some structurally conservative, just to go on with business as usual. So you have to look very carefully on that one. Incremental change or being the enemy. Probably it's easy to agree with that statement, because when I look at the figures, what we need to increase energy efficiency and reorientation of capital, it needs to be revolutionary and absolutely dynamic. And the big issue when I talk to people in the streets with Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, who always claim that their view is science-based, and that's close to my history on IPCC and what I did in the last 30 years, the question for me always comes up, how to do that within our democratic structures, because I believe that we need to do that in our democratic structures, and there is no third way, just that we have a benevolent dictator, because then we would give up on our European way of life. So we need to go out of our comfort zones and speak to those people not convinced yet. And so creating policy coherence, that's important. I think the second element you mentioned, yes, we need more leadership. If we have the representative democracy as we enjoy it today, leaders are, for me, elected for 4 years' time. And within these 4 years, they need to exercise leadership and not just looking at the polls each and every day, because I think that's misleading. Because many of the great decisions we have taken were heavily discussed, for example, forbidding smoking in restaurants. And just the day thereafter, people were convinced that it was a good move. And I'm convinced that with a more just fundamental calm pricing, just shifting our ways, we will be creating lots of just benefits. We just need to dare to do so.
Thank you. Well, let's take one more question. 2 more questions. All right.
Good morning, everyone. This is Ilya Heidegger, an independent consultant from the Netherlands. Both Mr. Canfin and Mr. Zag emphasized the importance of implementation. Now, the 3 institutions are more geared towards making policy than implementation. And the way that they look at implementation often means more monitoring, more bureaucracy. How do you envisage that? How would you go about improving implementation on the ground? Because I totally agree with you. Thank you.
There was one more here in the middle, in the front.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amar Snani, and I am the president and founder of the Green Movement in Algeria. So my question is, you've spoken about climate change, sustainable food policy, and sustainable Europe. So my question is, how can this be possible without involving Africa, and especially North Africa, because it is geographically more closer to Europe? And if there is plans involving Africa or North Africa, so Europe and Africa have a rough history together. So how can Europe earn the trust of Africa or those countries to make a sustainable Africa and Europe together? This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, one last one.
Thank you. Dino Leshinsky from Center for Sustainable Alternatives from Slovakia. I have the question to energy mix of Germany. If we are speaking in my country about the electrification of mobility, sustainable mobility, we are looking for the source of energy, how is energy created. And then if we move to the European dimension, then we're taking the average, the mix, energy mix. And if we analyze the country by country, so we come to Germany and we see quite a big problem from my point of view. So what's your opinion on the energy mix in Germany, and what is adapted here to change towards more sustainable or low carbon sources of our energy? Thank you.
Thank you. The first question was what to do to get better implementation. First, we need to be careful of not destroying the existing infringement procedures. That is strong, and it has helped us in the environment field for many years. And just look what's happening on the nitrate directives nowadays. So it's in there. But we need to complement it, and I say complement, not replace it, just by dialogues as we have it in the environmental impact review. But this dialogue doesn't make sense if the Commission talks to the Environment Ministry. You need to have conferences where you have the line ministries on board plus civil society to make it fruitful, because then it could help. Moreover, probably still some approaches which we developed in the beginning of the 90s, and I was posted in Brussels at that point in time, an early involvement of lawmakers of what functions within different countries is still something which I would like to explore further. On cooperation with Northern Africa, with Africa overall, I couldn't agree more. And then the first point is on consistency. Yes, you're absolutely right that part of our agricultural policy is destroying sustainable markets in Africa. So if we look at the impacts of our food and agricultural policy, we need to take into account the impacts on Africa. In energy policies and other fields, as well. My Chancellor is just inviting this week African leaders to discussing issues like this. I think the point we're still grapple with is to building an alliance in all of Europe, not just in the Mediterranean, southern European countries, on how to have a better, just regular structured dialogue at a leaders level with Northern Africa, because it is important for on many fronts, so I couldn't agree more. So any suggestions to make that more a priority would be most welcome, because I would be very disappointed by our political establishment if we were just to act if the migration crisis became too big, because there are many other stakes we should develop together earlier on. On the question of the energy mix, yes, you're absolutely right. Germany has been, and to a large extent still is, a country who based its economic success on fossil fuels. I think we have made quite some progress. When in 2000 we had some 4% of renewable energies in the electricity. Now we're at 43. We are committed to phase out coal while phasing out nuclear at the same time. We are partners like Slovakia in the coalition to phase out fossil fuels. So it's the right thing. Is it quick enough? You have a question, but it was a very difficult debate here, and we had this coal commission, and we are just more or less constantly negotiating on the coal phase-out law. So we are on the right direction, and we're trying to moving quicker on that one. The carbon price has been gone down in the last 3 or 4 days, which I cannot fully understand, because quotas will be very short in the timeline between 2020 and 2030, in particular if you look at expanding European ambition levels. But coal, at least hard coal, is at the brink of being price competitive in Germany. So having a political plan to phase down coal plus clear-cut price signals are probably changing the landscape in Germany quickly. The bigger problem is then how quickly do we get out of oil dependency in the transport sector, and so there are still some things to be done. Everybody is praising the decision of Elon Musk to build a new gigafactory in the vicinity of Berlin. So there are issues of consistency. I think in the energy sector, we're doing not too badly. In the transport sector, there are still big challenges ahead.
Okay, I have one last question before we wrap up our panel, which links back to Europe's role in the world. And I've already mentioned that we are a bit concerned about inconsistencies between the promise of the Green Deal and other political priorities, Commission priorities, for instance, the clear objective to further boost global trade volumes, to open up new markets, which we believe is necessarily linked to, of course, more resources use and more emissions. negotiations. But there's another question linked to the trade agenda. What is your government's position on having a more robust trade policy at the European level to really leverage the fact that we are still the world's largest market? And is Germany going to support a carbon border tariff?
We are looking into the issue. I think it's one of the most prominent issues discussed nowadays. Yes, including environment much stronger into trade and tax agreements is necessary. The question is how that to be done. Because just stating that we put taxes on our border always has the political implication that we are better than the rest of the world. And in the agricultural policy, we are not. And I fear that when setting up these tariffs, we're getting down into the weeds where what is a brilliant political idea will be becoming structurally conservative and just more or less stopping development policies together with Northern Africa, but that we draw up fences. So that's a big risk. But having said that, we have to look into this option. I think it will be a big political element of the debate for raising our ambition. For certain commodities you could like to test it, but for me the environmental integrity and the social and overall political integrity of such kind of tax measures would be of big importance.
Okay, we're definitely interested in taking this debate further. So let's have a look at our survey for the end. So how optimistic are you about the European Green Deal? Very pessimistic or very optimistic? So I think there's a quite nearly 50% of people who are so-so. So I believe we're going to ask that question again today at the end of our discussions, and we'll see how we develop. Are we becoming more optimistic or more pessimistic? Yeah, I think it looks like people are a bit undecided, but potential, yeah.
It's going up.
Okay, potential optimistic side, but people are undecided. Okay, so that's interesting. Yes. Let's see where we are at 6 o'clock in the evening.
So probably go to the agriculture minister meeting to move it up there.
Okay, but let me thank you very much for being with us and for answering our questions.
Thank you.
So I believe we now deserve a little break. So there will be a 30 minutes coffee break outside, and I ask you to be back on time at around 10:45. Thank you.